Hello and welcome to this week's video. This week I'll be sharing my thoughts and feelings of Season 6 of My Hero Academia so far. This is a mid-season review and I'll be sharing whether I thought it was good, bad or somewhere in between. But before I get into my thoughts about it, what did you think about this year's season thus far? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comment section down below and you will be read out in next week's show. Whilst you're there, be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the button, do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube wants you to do, because YouTube is an increasingly scary place for small content creators. Support your local small content creator today, it will do them a power of good. Now, on to the review. I'll be honest, dear listener, when it came to writing this review, I was really unsure how to divide all of this up. Should I divide it by beginning, middle and end? Should I divide it by location? Because this, unlike previous series, isn't a series of different story arcs, it's just one long story arc. So in the end, I just decided to just divide it up as we typically do, by positive, negative, and my overall feelings, well, overall. So with all of that said, let us get into the positives. And I have to say, and I have said this pretty much every single review of this season thus far, but the animation has just been top notch and has been consistently high quality. Whilst there have been a few moments here and there where the quality has dipped a little bit, the swing has not been quite as drastic as it's been in previous seasons. I will grant you, however, there have been a fewer awe-inspiring, breathtaking moments in this season, as far as the animation itself has been concerned, but that is not to say that this season has been without them. For example, the fight sequences we'll get with Mirako towards the start of the season were just fantastic. Just these spectacular displays of heroism, just this flow to the fights and how she managed to navigate her environments was just brilliant to see, and how well they're able to convey her character with only a few limited sequences. She has swiftly become a fan favourite character, though let's be honest, that's not all down to personality. The confrontation between Twice and Hawks is just brilliantly put together, with that wall of bodies that Twice was creating just being this truly arresting image. The facial expressions that we got with our villains at times were unnerving and genuinely creepy, showing an insane bestiality to them which just was horrifying to witness. And that strange thought space realm that we saw within Tomura, with that shattered world unfolding around him and his family being there, was just this brilliantly imaginative sequence. Throughout this season we have just had a consistently quality animation. Sure, maybe not as good as some of the stuff we had previously, but there hasn't been these major dips as I've just said. I feel that with everything said and done, that the sequence that we had towards the start of this season with Twice and the drama surrounding him was just brilliant, and I feel that it is one of the standout moments of drama within this season and within this program as a whole. As I often say, the My Hero Academia world is not one that I would necessarily want to live in, as there is a level of cruelty and inhumanity here which is frequently hinted at and sometimes just outright shown in certain sequences. Twice is a person who was practically abandoned by the world at large for no real great reason. He was just kind of a fuck up at times, but as a result of that he was just thrust into a life of crime, and there he went. He found himself getting mixed up with the League of Villains, and he as an individual is a victim of this world, and it really does make the case as to why someone like him would want to follow the League. And we see this again with what the flashback sequence we get this season with Spinner, and it's something that he's hinted at a few seasons ago with Magne. Of course, with the League of Villains, not everyone is there for good intentions. Dabi and Toga are certainly there for more sadistic ends, and Mr. Compress's motivations, whilst pure, do feel horribly misplaced given the goals of the League and how they may well be executed. However, that is a discussion for a whole other time. I feel that the revelation of Dabi's parentage was just brilliantly handled. Yes, this is something that was spoilt for me well in advance, but the way that the revelation was executed was just, and I'd hate to say the word again, but brilliant. Just the sheer shattered look on Endeavor's face just spoke volumes, and the sheer sadistic pleasure that Dabi got from just bringing all of this out into world, and just the sheer level of destruction that he's been able to bring has been brilliant to see. Of course, I'm not taking satisfaction from the pain he's inflicting, but just the sadistic pleasure that he's getting from it all is just fantastic. This whole revelation is one of the most important moments in our story, And going forward, it's going to be one of the most vital moments in this story. For not just the rest of this season, but in all likelihood for the rest of this series as a whole. So had this revelation been mishandled, then the trajectory of everything we get after this just wouldn't work. Now, to be fair, we have not seen the execution of the aftermath stuff just yet. Sure, we've seen in the manga, but I've not read the manga, so personally I'll have to judge for myself whether it's able to stick the landing on all of this or not, but I'm quietly confident they'll be able to do it. I might not necessarily like all of it, but I have a feeling it won't be cack-handedly done, so to speak. I also feel that the development that we saw of Bakugo was just brilliant to see. As I have often said, Bakugo is a character who I think gets unfairly pigeonholed as just being Mr. Loud Explosion Angry Man, that he's just a cartoon character, that there's nothing more to him than just being the main character's rival and just being something of a loudmouth and a brash idiot. But I've always felt there's been more to him than that. This layer of nuance that has been often hinted to, but never really explored to quite the extent that it has done in this season. As this season takes great strides to just show us this level of nuance and emotional maturity that the character has. Now, to be fair, an argument could be made that emotional maturity stands in a sharp contrast to his choice of hero name, and that it creates this crude juxtaposition that just kind of undermines the emotional maturity that we end up seeing here. But I would argue that that isn't necessarily the case. All this does is just confirm that this deeper emotional maturity, this deeper layer to him, has always been there, to some degree or another. It's just never been able to come to the surface. Though we're starting to see it come to the surface a lot now as he matures both physically and mentally. Though even with all that said, he can still be socially immature. He is a teenager at the end of the day, and teenagers are fully capable of being silly and doing very silly things. And I'll be honest, that is an aspect that many pieces of fiction fail to be able to properly do. So him picking the super murder explosion dynamite name or whatever it is, in the grand scheme of things, is a more truthful depiction of the thought processes of an adolescent than what we get in many other pieces of fiction. Pieces of fiction that are often lauded as being more thematically and emotionally deeper than all of this. My Hero Academia as a whole, and forgive me for going off script for a moment, is a program that I feel gets unfairly lumped as just being yet another anime superhero show, when frequently it shows a level of nuance and understanding not just of its own world, but our world as well, and it is able to discuss superhero culture and the realities of living in a culture like that in a way which frankly puts many other writers to shame. And the fact that we're seeing this rich layer of thematic depth frequently, even with what has been largely, for most of the entirety of the season, just one long action sequence, just truly shows the level of skill that the show's creator, and by extension the manga's creator, just truly has. I will admit that I don't feel that everything has quite landed, and there's a few things coming up that I am curious as to how they'll be able to stick the landing of all of that, but that is stuff that we'll cover when we get there. I don't want what was going to come up next, I should say, to make it sound as though I hated this season. It's just that with something like this, given my education and my background, there's certain aspects of storytelling that I'm a little bit more sensitive to than I think your average viewer is going to do. So forgive me if this gets overly clinical, a little bit too technical, and at times possibly a tad too nitpicky, but you know, I've got to be honest with you, dear listener, I would not want to give you the false impression that I loved everything about this season, nor that I hated everything about this season. But with all that said, let us get into the negatives. If I'm going to be brutally honest with you, dear listener, I feel that the structure of this season has just been... It's been all over the place. There's just no real fair way of putting it without just devolving into swear words. And I feel that at the end of the day that this has been the end result of just so much happening at any given time. It often feels like there's just 3 different fights going on at 3 different locations almost throughout the story, and sometimes even more than that, with many of these fights and character developing moments being intercut with other moments and other characters and other fights, meaning that some of these aspects, some of these very important character developing sequences never really get time to properly breathe and develop. At the start of this season, it wasn't so bad because we had two clear groups to focus on. We had the hospital group and we had the villa group. Sure, we also had the group that was in the forest, but they didn't really factor into anything for quite some time. But as time went by, we just got divided down and divided ground, with new groups forming and subgroups within those groups forming, to the point where it felt as though our attention was constantly being dragged from one place to the other, and again, often to the detriment upon the character drama that was happening before us, and towards the action sequences themselves that were also happening. We're oftentimes it feeling like we would have a single episode's worth of character development or just fighting being split over 2 episodes and combined with something else which could be very different tonally, thematically, and in some cases in terms of pacing. And there were often moments where we would just have major developments within the story, within how our characters are growing, and just these major twists to the story which were just wrapped up in an episode or 2, or at worst in a few short scenes. The fight between Midori and Tomura could have had an entire episode dedicated to it. I'm not saying that it could all have been done in one single episode, but I really feel that there should have just been at least one episode where it was just the two of them slugging it out, and we got a greater understanding as to the pair of them, what motivates them, this rivalry between the two of them. Is it really a rivalry? Does Midoriya see this differently? Does Tomura see this differently? Would have been great to get an insight into that. The fight between Ochako and Toga ends almost as soon as it starts, to the point where by the time it ended, it just left me feeling, well, why bother putting that in at all? Bearing in mind we didn't really learn all that much. I think the only thing that we really learned was that we got a final confirmation that Toga has feelings towards Ochako, which I think was already hinted to in the past, so we didn't really learn anything new. It felt like a case of, well, we need more fighting, we need something else. Who have we got? Throw Toga in there for a short fight sequence, which at the end has no real impact upon the wider story. Maybe it has a bigger impact later on, but here and now it doesn't really mean much of anything. Spinner's backstory, which I believe was brilliantly put together, I think probably should have been included with the My Villain Academia stuff last season, because getting it in the previous episode, again, as good as it was, just took time away from other things, particularly the death and sacrifice of Mr. Compress. That should have been his moment to shine, but he spends most of it just discussing other people's flashback sequences. And of course, the stuff with Mirio getting his quirk back. I will be blunt, and it may be controversial to say this, but that needed its own episode, rather than just the hand wave that we got. And if we were going to get a hand wave, it should have been a case of, oh, I'll explain it later. Then maybe in the aftermath stuff, that's when we got the episode discussing it, because the way that it was handled there and then, sure, great heroic moment, but I'm just there thinking to myself, okay, this is a great moment for character drama, this is a great moment for world building, let's find out what it is like to be a hero that's lost their quirk, and we didn't get that. Sure, we might get something like that further on, but again, here and now, wasn't there. I feel that we needed it. I don't know where we'd have slotted it in, but that's just the way this season feels that it's been built so thus far. My second major issue that I've had, and this is one that I've mentioned many times in the past so far of the course of this season, so I won't dwell on it too much, is the feeling that I feel that this arc has gone for way too long. We are now 13 episodes into this season, and we're only now just getting to the end of it. Sure, we have the aftermath stuff coming over. We can debate how much we can tie this into that, but for me, I'm seeing it more as just a straight cut between the two of them. And for what we have in this particular half, just it went on for way too long. And again, I feel that there are issues with the structure here. I will be honest, I feel that the majority of the episodes themselves have been of a brilliant quality, a really high quality. Though I do feel that some of them could have been cut or amended or restructured to make the entire season flow a lot better. I know that that would have meant changing stuff that would have made the programme feel less faithful to the manga in some respects. I understand that, and I am sensitive to the fact that some people, that's a point you don't cross. That is something you don't do. But for me, I feel that some changes needed to be made. As I often say, there is a language to every medium, and there are things that you can do in a manga that you can't do on television just from a structural point of view alone. and I feel that there are some things that could have been altered and amended in the adaptation. It didn't need anything radically changing, because for the most part I feel the story works fine as is, but you could have easily done something as simple as getting all the sequences where the class of Class 1A and Class 1B are fighting to take down Gigantonomachus Man. All that stuff could have been shortened down to an episode or two. Just focus on those guys, what are they doing, and how they're trying to stop this villain. It didn't need to be cut and spliced with the stuff with Midoriya and Tomura, as in the end I feel that took a lot away from their particular stuff. Just restructuring, I feel, is something that this season would have needed to make it flow better. Again, the quality is there, it's just how it was executed. And my final major complaint is that I feel that many of our main cast just felt horribly underutilized. There are just many sections within this arc where Midoriya isn't even mentioned, let alone shown doing anything. He spends most of the opening section of this arc just off doing something, helping old ladies cross the street or whatever. We don't see him or really do much with him. And then eventually when his fight does come along, the whole fight between him and Tomura oftentimes feels more like a side attraction more than it feels to be the main event. There's also a considerable stretch of time where the students of Class 1A and Class 1B just stood around doing really nothing. I know that their inclusion in the greater story probably wouldn't have radically changed the course of events, but they just spent a hell of a lot of time just stood there not really doing much of anything. Yes, they were supposed to be the relief line, the last line of defense, but they didn't really do that. And the only time they did do that, it feels like it comes from a sheer coincidence. The only reason they did anything is because Gigantonomachus Man happened to be running by their direction. Had he been a little bit further out of the way, they wouldn't have been able to really do much of anything. And as such, their inclusion in this arc just feels like a case of, well, people like them, we got to do something with them, so let's just put them in a field and we'll figure it out later. I feel that this arc as a whole was just more interested in and more enamoured with the pro-heroes than most of our central cast. Goodness, even the Meta Liberation Army themselves didn't really factor into much of this really at all, with only a couple of their members really being shown to do much of anything. Their inclusion in this arc just feels like it's there purely and simply for the case of giving our villains more cannon fodder and more goons to help fight the heroes. Beyond this, they don't really factor into anything. Last season set them up as being this major challenge, this major force within this world, but in the end, they're just hired help. Their inclusion in this arc doesn't do anything really, they're just there to slow our heroes down, to be a speed bump. Nothing is really explored, there's no deeper understanding of where they stand on a socio-political scale. They're just there to punch the heroes and get punched by the heroes, and that's it. And it feels like a major missed opportunity to do some really interesting stuff with them. And I can't help but feel that maybe more stuff with them was planned, but maybe the writer changed their mind, or they decided, right, I'm going to start wrapping this up now, so let's just have them as hired help. I don't know, but it is a shame more wasn't done with them. Okay, so now into the overview, and I feel that, as I said earlier on, that I did enjoy this season thus far quite a lot, as I feel there's a great quality to it, with much of what we've seen being easily on par with anything that you've seen up until this point thus far, and in some cases being better than previous seasons. I feel that at the end of the day, the weakness of it is its execution more so than the quality of it. The best analogy that I can possibly think of to discuss this season is that it's like listening to your favourite radio station. You know, you listen to your favourite radio show on your favourite radio station, but the signal keeps cutting out, so your overall enjoyment isn't quite as good as it usually is, but you still got a kick out of it, even though you wish that you could have heard it a little bit better. And that's my feeling about this season as a whole thus far. Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff here, but it just needed tightening up. Certain stuff needed developing, certain stuff needed reducing, and then maybe in the end we would have got something that felt a little more succinct. Granted, we are transitioning into a whole other era as far as the greater narrative itself is concerned, and I'm not at a point where I'd say, oh, I'd cut this or I'd remove that wholesale, at least until maybe I've seen the season as a whole. Again, this season thus far has been great, I just feel that the execution of it at times has been kind of lacking. with all that said and done, let's now get into Comment Corner. Okay, now it's time for Comment Corner. I will admit that I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit, so it's a good thing that I recorded this a good couple of days ahead of time, so forgive me if anyone's left a comment over the past day or so and I haven't had included it in this video. Like I say, I think I'm coming down with something, but with that said, our comment for this week comes from Big X1, who said, I have enjoyed both this week's episode and this year's season so far. I do agree it maybe has gone on a bit too long with the fighting, but I'm excited to see exactly what the fallout of all this is going to be, and I agree. I feel that I have enjoyed this season more so than I've disliked it, though again I feel that the fighting stuff just needed wrapping up far quicker, or at least it needed to be delivered in a more efficient and more interesting way. I'm not going to repeat myself because, you know, this video has gone on far enough. With all that said, what did you think about this year's season thus far? Have you loved it? Have you hated it? Let me know in the comment section down below, and you will be right in next week's show. Whilst you're there, be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the stupid stuff that YouTube wants you to do, because YouTube is an increasingly scary place for small content creators. Support your local small content creator today. It will do them a power of good. Now, thank you all for listening. I need to cut this short because my throat is starting to get rather tight and warm. So I'll say thank you all and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!